It was faster than a fighter. It was sleeker than anything the Army Air Forces had ever seen. But to the young men ordered to fly it, the Martin B-26 Marauder wasn't a marvel of engineering. It was a death sentence. They called it the Flying Coffin. They called it the Martin Murderer. But the name that stuck was the Widowmaker. In 1942, the training losses were so catastrophic that a dark phrase echoed through the barracks of MacDill Field: "One a day in Tampa Bay." And yet, this hated aircraft would go on to achieve the lowest combat loss rate of any American bomber in World War II. How did a plane that pilots refused to fly become the unsung hero of the war? This is the story of the B-26 Marauder. To understand the tragedy of the Marauder, we have to go back to January 1939. The world was holding its breath. The Luftwaffe was the most terrifying air force on the planet, and the United States Army Air Corps knew they were falling behind. The Army issued Circular Proposal 39640. They didn't just want a new bomber. They wanted a miracle. It needed range. It needed a 2,000-pound bomb load. But above all, it needed speed. They demanded a top speed of over 300 miles per hour. At the time, that was faster than most fighter planes in existence. Entered Glenn Martin, a pioneer of aviation and a man who wasn't afraid of a gamble. He looked at the requirements and told the Army, "I can give you exactly what you want." His team, led by Peyton Magruder, designed a cigar-shaped fuselage that was purely aerodynamic. Two massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engines, the most powerful engines available, were strapped to it. It was a muscle car with wings. But to get that speed, they had to make a sacrifice. Physics is a cruel mistress. To reduce drag, they made the wings short. Very short. This created a dangerously high wing loading. In simple terms, those small wings had to support a massive amount of weight. And that meant the B-26 couldn't float gently down to the runway like other planes. It had to fly fast just to stay in the air. If you slowed down too much, you didn't glide, you fell. Usually, a new aircraft goes through years of testing. You build a prototype, you crash it, you fix it, you build another. But it was 1940. France had fallen. Britain was burning. The U.S. government was desperate. In an unprecedented move, the Army Air Corps ordered 1,100 B-26s straight off the drawing board. No prototype, no testing phase. The first time a B-26 flew, it was already a production model. And the first pilots to fly it weren't test pilots. They were the guinea pigs. The planes began arriving at training bases like MacDill Field in Tampa. The pilots waiting for them were fresh out of flight school. Most had only flown slow, forgiving trainers like the T-6 Texan. Imagine learning to drive in a Toyota Corolla, and then for your first highway trip, someone straps you into a Formula One car and tells you not to crash. The B-26 required a landing speed of over 130 miles per hour. That was insane for the era. If a pilot came in too slow, the short wings would stall instantly. The plane would flip over on its back and slam into the ground. The accidents started immediately. Landing gear collapsed under the immense weight. Engines failed on takeoff, but mostly it was the stalls. The propeller blades on the B-26 were huge. If the landing gear strut collapsed, the spinning blades would tear through the fuselage, right where the pilot and co-pilot were sitting. Fear is contagious. Rumors spread faster than the plane itself. It's a killer. The wings are too short. It has no visible means of support. Hence the nickname, the Flying Prostitute. By 1942, the situation at MacDill Field was so bad that the phrase, "one a day in Tampa Bay," wasn't an exaggeration. It was a statistic. The carnage couldn't be hidden. It reached Washington. The Senate War Investigating Committee, led by Harry Truman, launched an inquiry. Pilots were on the verge of mutiny. Many refused to fly it. They would rather face a court-martial than step into a B-26 Marauder. They argued that the plane was fundamentally flawed, a death trap sold to the government by a greedy manufacturer. Truman was furious. He threatened to cancel the entire production line. The B-26 Marauder was on the chopping block. Its career seemed over before it had even dropped a bomb on the enemy. But the Army Air Forces had invested too much money to just give up. They needed someone to save the program, someone the pilots respected, someone who could tame the beast. They called Jimmy Doolittle. Jimmy Doolittle was already a legend. He had just bombed Tokyo, but his next mission wasn't against the Japanese. It was against the fear paralyzing his own pilots. He arrived at the training base to find morale at rock bottom. He didn't give a speech. He didn't yell. He simply walked out to a B-26 and told the mechanics to prep it for takeoff. What happened next became aviation folklore. Doolittle took off, and while climbing, at a critical moment where most pilots would panic, he cut one engine. The B-26, the plane everyone said couldn't fly, was climbing on one engine. But Doolittle wasn't done. He turned the plane into the dead engine, a maneuver that was supposed to be suicidal. He landed smoothly, taxied back to the terrified students, and said, "This airplane is fine. You're just afraid of it." He proved that the B-26 wasn't a bad plane. It was just an unforgiving one. It demanded respect. It demanded that you fly it by the numbers, not by feel. Doolittle's demonstration broke the psychological curse. But the Army also made changes. They stopped sending rookies straight into the cockpit. They increased training hours. Back at the factory, Glenn Martin finally compromised. They extended the wingspan by 6 feet on later models to improve stability. They enlarged the vertical tail for better control. The beast was being tamed. But the training grounds of Florida were one thing. The flak-filled skies of Europe and the Pacific were another. It was time to see if the Widowmaker could actually fight. The B-26's combat debut in the Pacific was complicated. At first, they used it as a low-level torpedo bomber. It was fast, yes, but flying a heavy twin-engine bomber just feet above the waves against Japanese Zeros was a recipe for disaster. At the Battle of Midway, 4 B-26s attacked the Japanese fleet using torpedoes. Only 2 came back, and they were riddled with hundreds of bullet holes. The Army realized, we are using this plane wrong. It wasn't a torpedo bomber. It was a medium-altitude Marauder. The real turning point came in the European theater. The 9th Air Force adopted a new tactic. Instead of hugging the ground, they flew at medium altitudes, around 12,000 feet. Here, the B-26's speed became its armor. It was too fast for many German anti-aircraft guns to track effectively, and its rugged construction meant it could take a beating that would disintegrate a lighter plane. The pilots who once feared the Widowmaker started to realize something strange. They were coming home. While B-17 crews were suffering horrific losses over Germany, the B-26 squadrons were surviving. And then the numbers came in, the statistic that shocked everyone. The plane that killed its own pilots in training, the plane they called the Flying Coffin, ended the war with a combat loss rate of less than 0.5%. It was officially the safest American bomber to serve in the European theater. How is that possible? How does a Widowmaker become a lifesaver? The answer lies in the very design flaws that made it dangerous. The irony is cruel but simple. The very features that made the B-26 a nightmare for rookies, the heavy wing loading, the blistering landing speed, were exactly what kept veterans alive. In the air war, speed is life. The Marauder was fast enough to outrun many enemy fighters and get in and out of the target zone before the German flak gunners could adjust their aim. But there was a psychological factor too. Because the plane was so unforgiving, B-26 pilots had to be better. They couldn't afford to be lazy. They flew with a level of precision and discipline that other bomber crews didn't always need. That discipline saved them when the bullets started flying. No single aircraft tells this story better than Flakbait. This specific B-26 lived up to its name. It was a magnet for enemy fire. It had over 1,000 patched holes in its fuselage. It came back with its hydraulic lines cut, its electrical systems fried, and its engines smoking. But it always came back. Flakbait survived an incredible 207 combat missions, more than any other American bomber in the entire war. Not a B-17, not a B-24, but the dreaded Widowmaker. It proved that Glenn Martin's muscle car was built like a tank. Despite its incredible success, the B-26 didn't get the hero's welcome it deserved. Pilots loved the B-17 Flying Fortress because it looked majestic and brought them home. The public loved the P-51 Mustang because it was sexy. The B-26, it was just efficient. And the Widowmaker reputation never truly washed off. As soon as the war ended, the Air Force scrapped them with ruthless speed. Within a few years, almost none were left. They tried to erase the memory of the mistake that turned into a miracle. The Martin B-26 Marauder was a misunderstood machine. It was an aircraft ahead of its time, pushed into service before its pilots were ready. It demanded perfection from imperfect men. And when those men finally rose to the challenge, they forged a weapon that was safer than the legendary Flying Fortress. The Widowmaker didn't kill them. In the end, it was the only thing that kept them alive. What do you think? Was the B-26 a design failure that got lucky, or a masterpiece that was misunderstood? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive into aviation history, hit that subscribe button.
We have more stories of legendary machines coming up next. Thanks for watching.